Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast with Mike and Mike. Sales is a thinking process. This podcast will help you learn about what works in sales, how to hone your skills, and increase your success. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and I'm here with one of the two Mikes, Mike Simmons. Hello, Mike.
Hey, Jody.
Now, every week I say Catalyst Sale Podcast with Mike and Mike. The two Mikes are the founders of Catalyst Sale, and we're lucky enough to have Mike Simmons here with us every week. And one of these weeks, I'm going to slip it in and say Catalyst Sale Podcast with Mike and Jody.
I bet a couple of people would laugh at that.
Well, Mike Connor wouldn't be one of them, though. So we'll leave his name there. Mike, I have a listener question for you this week. I know how much you love these.
Awesome.
Our question comes from Ann from San Diego. And Ann mentions how she knows from listening to the show that Catalyst Sale has the opportunity to work with a lot of different organizations. And I think her question is fascinating. What is something you consistently find with organizations you work with? So what's maybe a problem you consistently see, or even a good thing? I don't know, wherever you want to go with that, Mike.
Well, so I mean, consistently, each of the organizations that we've had a chance to work with, they are committed to their customer base. They're committed to their audiences. They've got a need that they've identified in the marketplace, and they've either put together a product or a service or a solution that addresses that need. So that's one of the positive things. It's neat to work with founders and leaders inside organizations who are committed to the success of their audiences. And we use that as one of the ways that we actually qualify the types of companies that we want to work with. On the other side of the equation, on one of the negative sides of the equation, one of the things that has become more and more clear to us as we've continued on this journey are the blind spots that exist inside these organizations. And when you think about a blind spot, the blind spot is not something that someone intentionally creates. I had my eyeglass prescription updated recently. And when we were going through that analysis or that consultation, it was clear where my blind spot is. And no matter what I did, I wouldn't be able to see the doctor's hand in that specific area. And I think it's important for all of us to realize we all have blind spots in our business. And it's not because we don't want to see them. It's because we actually can't.
That's interesting. Can you give us an example? Your example is really good at the eye doctor because that makes sense and we've all been there. Can you give an example of something we might find in business or something from you personally where you've had a blind spot in your career?
Yeah. So, I mean, the biggest one is usually just not being able to take the perspective of the customer. So you stay so focused on this thing that you want to deliver to the marketplace, this need that you're going to address. And having a blind spot here or having a high level of focus is actually a good thing in that it helps you stay the path that you want to with the organization. But where the risk comes out is you could end up developing a product or developing a solution or developing a capability that doesn't necessarily align with what the market is looking for. And one way to address the blind spot, and we'll go back to the doctor instance, that doctor could see where my blind spot was. They could see all of the information that was in that blind spot. And Jody, if you were in the room, if you were in the room at the doctor's office, you would have seen that piece or that thing that was in my blind spot. So one way to overcome blind spots is to gather additional perspective. And we've got to be really careful here because many times when we surround ourselves with a lot of people who believe in the ideas and the concepts that we're talking about, and they're passionate about the product and they're passionate about the market, we create our own organization blind spots because we start to operate inside this echo chamber. So I think this is one of the more valuable services that we provide inside organizations. And that's being able to come in and take an outside perspective, an outsider's perspective, kind of a beginner's mind approach when working inside an organization. We can ask a lot of those questions that the organization may no longer ask. The other thing we do is we talk with customers and we ask them the question about why they use the product or how they use the product. And we start talking to other people who are like those customers. So a surefire way to overcome these blind spots is to engage with others. And I think we've said this a couple of different times in a couple of different ways, but you should never fail alone. So ask for help, ask questions, leverage your network, lean on others who have walked a similar path at one point or another.
I have a story that I think really helps illustrate blind spots, Mike. You're familiar with the biggest icon of the Forest Service, I assume. Who do you think I'm talking about?
That would be Smokey Bear.
That's right. And you said it right. Smokey Bear. Most people say Smokey the Bear.
And I was in the most people category until I heard your podcast where you talk about Smokey Bear instead of Smokey the Bear.
That's right. The Park Leader Show for Smokey's 70th birthday, I teamed up with the U.S. Forest Service. We did an episode about Smokey Bear. Well, there is an old song because everybody calls Smokey Bear Smokey the Bear. There's an old song by the name of Smokey the Bear. And I didn't want to include that in the podcast because it's wrong. So some friends of mine, a band from Nashville, Wild Ponies, they re-recorded the song just to include on that podcast. Only they took the word the out of it. Saying exactly the same way, only it's Smokey Bear instead of Smokey the Bear. And I played it for my family. And all 3 members of my family, not counting me, heard the song and then swore Smokey the Bear was in the song. Even though it wasn't, they never once heard it, but they just assumed they would hear it. And so they swore they heard it. And it was never there. And it just makes me think how often something like that happens. We assume something is going to happen, or we're used to when we do this happens, and we don't even truly pay attention. And it now becomes a blind spot because we expected one thing, and even though something else happened, or maybe somebody said something and we have in our head the way it should be, and we don't even listen, even though we did. Well,
think about.
Yeah, no, that's, I'm just saying maybe we listen, but we don't hear because we hear what we thought we were going to hear.
Yeah, and I just demonstrated what happens when you start speaking because you've got a point to say instead of listening until the end of the comment. But as you go, so think about the conversation we had with Don Miller when he was on the podcast. He talks about what the brain is intended to do, and one of the primary functions of the brain is to keep you alive. And there's this. I think we've all done it. I could be driving home on the freeway from the office to our house, and as I'm driving on the freeway, there's so much stuff that I could get caught up in sensory overload, from trees to rocks to cars to whatever. Yet there are time periods where I don't even remember driving the last 2 miles. And you just get yourself into that kind of autopilot mode. And I think as we think about the blind spots, many of these blind spots occur as a survival mechanism so that you're not so consumed by the noise around you. And, there's another example similar to the one that you shared. There's a video out there where, and we'll find the video and we'll include it in the show notes, but it's the video where the instruction is to count the number of basketballs and the number of times they're bounced over the course of the video. And as everybody is focused on the basketballs, people don't see the bear that walks across in the background because we're so focused on the thing that our mind is telling us to stay focused on. So to bring this back into things that we can do inside our business to avoid these blind spots, lean on your network, lean on others who've done work like this before. Ask them some really direct questions about what they're seeing in the business and how they're seeing your business apply and how you're seeing things change within the customer base, and go through the use cases. Because if you do the work, if you take the perspective of your customer, you can avoid getting yourself into scenarios where you just miss the obvious.
Well, you've hit on a point that I was going to make sure that I asked about. And I'm sure we want to correct our blind spots, but part of the problem is we often don't even know that we have them. Unless somebody points them out, we don't see them because we're blind to it. I could have played that song to my family 10 times. And if I hadn't said, no, it's Smokey Bear, not Smokey the Bear, listen to this, they would have heard Smokey the Bear every time, even though it wasn't there. So that's, I think, where we need to turn this is, okay, well, I hear what Mike Simmons is saying. I probably have blind spots, but I don't even know what they are or where to look for them. If that's the case, Mike, how do you, and you did touch on this, but How do you go about that? How do you start to uncover what your blind spots might be?
Well, I think one of the big things you can do is be careful about bringing people in your organization who are just going to toe the company line and are always going to say yes. If you've got those folks inside your organization, yeah, they can help with scale and they can help move the organization forward. But if they're not transparent, if they're not sharing their perspective, you're losing the benefit of their potential creativity. So if you're in a room and everybody in the room is saying yes, yes, yes to something, find the person inside the room who can say no, or make sure that it's part of your culture that someone says no, because it's with that no question or with that no observation that you can potentially reveal some of the things that you're not seeing inside your company and or help you maintain a level of honesty when it relates to your perspective of the organization. I think the other thing that's really important, and we've hit on this a couple of different times here, but know that everybody has blind spots. You're not unique. As much as everybody's a special snowflake these days, you're not unique when it comes to blind spots. Everybody has them. And I would actually caution anybody out there who says, I don't have blind spots, to lean on other members within their team and see if they can help you identify those blind spots. Because if you don't have them, you may have some that are even bigger and are creating more risk than you really want to.
I would also give a caution here that if you are not open to candid feedback, if you're a little defensive, well, first of all, you're probably not listening to this show if you're not into self-improvement and making yourself and your career better. But if you're a little sensitive about that, perhaps be wise about who you select to get that feedback from, because you're very likely to get it. And sometimes it can hurt, Mike, when you find out what your it'll help, but it'll hurt a little bit in the beginning to find out what your blind spots are.
Yeah, it's tough to feel vulnerable, right? I mean, like, we want to think that we're all really good at what we do and that we're always doing the best and we're always operating with the best intentions. But know that there are things that exist. There are things that will happen in your business that you just can't see because they happen to fall in those blind spots. Your mind is not allowing you to see some of those risky areas. You know, I think of a process that we would do with one of the companies I was at before, where we would have a crush the competition workshop or crush workshops. And it would be the responsibility of different sales teams to take the perspective of one of our competitors, and their focus would be to crush us as an organization. So in that process, they're acting as the sales team within a competitive organization. They're doing the research to understand who we are as a business, what we do as a business, what we do well, where our blind spots are, where our focus is lacking. And they bring up scenarios, they surface objections that the customer should be thinking about, call them landmines inside the sales process, to highlight reasons why someone might not want to do business with us, or why it might be more beneficial to do business with one of our competitors. And through that process, you can quickly identify where your risk is as an organization. So maybe something to do is consider creating some of these SWAT teams inside your organizations that take on the role of your major competitors and start competing with you in an environment where you can identify some of the things that you may not be aware of.
What role do consultants for organizations and then coaches for individuals, what role can they play in addressing blind spots?
Yeah, and that's a softball question. So thanks for asking. I mean, I know that we have a consulting practice, and so for those of you who don't want to hear this, just turn off, and you can pick back up next week. Yeah, I think the role of consultants that consultants play in these scenarios is that they can come in with an unbiased beginner's mind perspective that is really hard to find inside an organization. We are not tied to the political baggage that occurs inside the organization. When someone brings me into an organization or brings our company into an organization, they bring Mike and I and our team into an organization, they should have a high level of trust in our ability to uncover things that were not apparent to them. And we have a high level of transparency with those organizations because we're not getting a paycheck from them on an every other week basis. We don't have to work with everybody inside that organization on a consistent basis. And many of them, I mean, it's where we've not run into a situation yet where we've worked with a company where they've said, no, we need less of you guys. So I think we're bringing good value to each of those discussions. But the advantage to leaning on a coach or leaning on a consultant is that they can draw attention to things that you wouldn't see, and they don't necessarily have that same mindset inside the organization where they might be intimidated by a charismatic leader inside the company who's focused on who's signing the checks. I look at it, our role is to help those organizations identify areas of risk and gaps and come up with solutions to address those gaps.
Well, here's another softball question for you then, Mike. Hopefully, as we learn about blind spots and then what Catalyst Sale can do, how can we find out more? Tell us how people, if they're interested in talking with you and Mike about blind spots and consulting and what you can do, how can they go about that?
I mean, the best way to do it is go to the Catalyst Sale website, and we continue to update the information on that site, share customer testimonials and feedback that they've had after working with us for a period of time. So that's an easy way. Another way is to go back through the back episodes of the podcast, and you'll find out that there are some consistent themes in the information that we put out in the marketplace. And that's us. If we're anything, we're pretty consistent. And then beyond that, Twitter and LinkedIn, through most of the social channels, even Facebook, we've got a Talk It Out Tuesday thing that we host on each Tuesday where we talk about an individual topic that someone has brought up or someone's found interesting. So those are easy ways to get a hold of us, and we're open to any conversation. Just we're a phone call away, an email away, and we're trying to make it easier for folks to get in touch with us.
Okay, thank you so much, Ann, for the great question this week. Thanks, Mike, for the great answer this week, and most of all, thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast.